So welcome back, everybody, to this week's episode of Thrive, your agency resource. Today, we're talking about getting more strategic in 2021. I think we could all use a little bit of that. We're talking about the practices in our agency that just cannot be ignored. We can't bury our heads in the sand. And today I'm talking with Jeff Meade, who runs Meade, which is a management consulting firm that works with mid-sized marketing agencies just like yours. Welcome to the show, my friend. I'm so excited for you to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
So this show has been, a little project and progress in the making, right?
Right.
What a year this year has been. 2020, just kind of was that wave that swallowed us up, and we dove back into the sea and got turned around again, and so interesting. So with all that's happened in the last 10 months, we don't have to rehash that. Everybody listening or
Right.
watching knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
There's actually been a lot of things, though, that have just naturally fallen to the wayside. There's no shame in it. It's just what happened, right? For all of us.
Right.
So now that we've been through a couple rounds of getting kicked around a little bit, and we know full well that those things are not going away, right?
Right.
How can we actually start to get more strategic for next year?
That's a good question, right? It seems like as you look out onto 2021, I was at the eye doctor the other day, and when I think about this, it's almost like that fuzzy focus, when the eye doctor's saying, which looks better, A or B? And you're like, kind of the same, but
Can you do it again? I always ask the guy, do it again. I don't know.
And that's what 2021 feels like. It's starting to come into this fuzzy focus where you've kind of been beat up, you got back up, got beat down, got back up. And now you kind of see the landscape. And so you're saying, all right, now that I have a sense of what's going on, right? I know generally when people might come back into the office, right? There's talks of when the vaccine might widely be available. So now you can start saying, okay, what do we look like in this new landscape? Is the stuff that we were doing in 2019, the stuff that we pieced together in 2020, is that still going to work in 2021? And really start saying, who do we want to be moving forward? I think, thinking about being more strategic, this is that time of year where, Kelly, I'm sure you've gone through it with your agencies, is now is when everybody's planning, right? Pandemic or not, this is when we would have been thinking about the new year. And we've been putting together all those big, hairy, audacious goals of all the stuff we're going to do.
Yep.
I think now we can start doing it, but the difference is now we can start saying, what do we want to look like, right? Like now we can force ourselves to say, okay, now is as good a time as ever, right? We've been beat up so much. How do we start to make the company look like the company we've always wanted it to be? I think with this crisis, this pandemic, it's forced us. Many of the things that we didn't want to do, whether it was, oh, we can't set up a location in that city. Oh, well, now we see that we can. It can happen real easily. So I think what many people realize, and I've seen it, is a lot of the stuff that we kept putting off, that we'll get to that. Now you can look at that and say, oh, you know what? This is the landscape where we can start to take some risk.
Right.
And see what sticks.
So what I'm hearing you saying also, the way that I interpret it, is that there's a mindset shift that we kind of wanted to happen, but it sort of happened for us. Right. So this mindset shift of like, oh, I can't do that. Like looking at all the reasons why something can't happen or won't happen or won't be able to happen, as opposed to looking at those limitations. We were thrown into like, oh, it's happening, I guess I better get on board, right?
Yeah.
But like, how important do you think is the continuation of that kind of mindset, the like, there are no limits mindset, that abundance mindset? How important is that going to be going into, not just going into next year, but continuing through into the future, right? Because in my experience, like, this is a choice. This comes down to a choice. Your mindset is a choice. We can continue to choose fear, scarcity, limitation, or optimism, right? Like innovation, opportunity, abundance. How important is embodying that in 2021 and beyond?
I think it's huge, right? I think many people, as tough as it was to get here, many people are saying, "Wow, this is the mindset that I've always wanted," right?
Yeah,
And I think we see it professionally, and you see it personally. Anybody who's gone through a personal crisis, right? This is the time where you start saying, "It's now or never," right? Like you're
right,
kind of forced. I mean,
right.
I think about even kind of personally, like I remember having a health scare, and for the longest time I kept saying, "Oh, you know what? I should lose a little weight." And then when you hit with a crisis, you're like, "Oh, I better do it now or else." And I
Right.
think that's what many people have felt. It's like now is the time, or else I have to walk away from this.
Yeah.
Do I truly want to grow an agency? Do I truly want to run an agency? And now is when you have to look at yourself in the mirror and say, is this something that I want to do? And if the answer is yes, I think you have to take that mindset and lean into it and say, all right, well, this is what I have to do to accomplish these goals. No longer can I push things to the wayside.
Right. And hope that everything's just gonna
Yeah, yeah,
magically happen one day, right?
exactly, exactly.
Um, so that I think that's good. I think that's a good foundation of like what we've been through, the mindset that we've always wanted. It's here. We can
Hmm.
now actually embrace it, embody it. But
Right.
now let's get down to like brass tacks. Um, when you work with your clients, you
Hmm.
work with them using what you call scorecards,
Right.
right?
Right.
So many agencies are using up to, I mean, probably up to 15 different metrics that they're looking
Yeah.
at.
Yeah.
But we can't look at 15, right?
No,
Like
no, you can't.
the reality is that this is back to the mindset. Like if you really want to be serious about things,
Hmm.
you have to have consistency, right?
Right.
So if you want change to be sustainable and consistent, we have to narrow down what we're looking at in terms of
Hmm.
these goals. So can you talk a little bit about like the 5 things, maybe not the 15, but the 5 that you really say like the other ones are have importance, they have value, but
Yep.
these 5 are like non-negotiable. What are those
Right.
for you?
Yeah, I think for me now, and it's usually, I think if I look at different agencies, sometimes I may drop one or two, but for the
Mhm.
most part, what I'm seeing now is that I'm putting in everybody's scorecard is motivation. That's the first one I'm putting in. And the reason I
I
put
like
it
it.
in is because I think what we're seeing now is when people are stuck at home, and boy, we've been stuck at home for a long time, right? I mean,
Yeah, and will be. We will be for a
yeah,
while.
exactly. I think if we're listening to the news, when it's all said and done, we will have been at home for more than 12 months, right? And so what starts to happen is people start becoming demotivated.
Mhm.
It's hard to see the big picture. And so the first metric I usually like putting on the scorecard is just, what does motivation look like? Are my people motivated? Do I need to give them a challenge? I often say, and there's research to support it, that people that work in agencies, knowledge workers, they're like folks who volunteer for an organization. And so the big thing is they need to have purpose, right? And so are you bringing purpose to the job? And that was easy when everybody was coming to the office, but now when you're at home and you fire up your Zoom and then you're talking for about 30 minutes and then you get off and then you do your work, and then you're trying to figure out how to do stuff with your kids and your family on the same roof. You stop losing the big picture,
Mm.
right? And it becomes really tactical. I think that's what we start seeing, that people just, their mindset becomes really tactical. All right, I now have to do A, B, and C. I have to make lunch for my kids. And so they do that. And I think it now is really pulling back and saying, how can we keep people motivated? So that's one. The other
Actually,
metric that,
before you go into the second
yeah,
one,
yeah.
I just want to build on that for a second or just
Okay.
highlight how important that is because I'm seeing the same thing. And I think we have to remember, we have to like go back to a little bit of analog. I said this the other day, like innovation going forward might actually look like going backward. And I don't mean
Hmm.
back to the way that we were doing things. I mean, not relying so much on the shiny things, right?
Right.
Like so getting back to basics. Yes, it's about purpose and fulfillment and all of those things. I feel like we forget sometimes as agency leaders that like we don't sell products. The thing that people are buying from us are our people, right?
Right.
It's
Right.
the not the people themselves, but the brain power, the thought, the strategy,
Yeah.
the enthusiasm. They're buying all of this, right? And so
Hmm.
if we don't take care of the thing that we're actually quote unquote selling,
Right.
I think we're missing the whole point, right?
Yeah. I mean, you hit it. People are our greatest asset. And if you're not taking care of that asset, it's not like other businesses where we're worried about property, plant, and equipment,
Yeah,
right? It's people. If the
right.
people are not happy, if they're not motivated, we're not creating the best product.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah,
your product, your quote unquote supply chain has all the reason in the world to leave,
they
right?
do.
Like there are a lot of people who are jumping ship. They're starting to realize that this time gives them that introspective quality to say, you know what, do I really love working for this company? Am
Exactly.
I being seen, heard, understood? Am I valued? Like I
Right.
don't have to take this. I could go anywhere. I could literally work anywhere now.
Right. Right.
So,
Yeah.
I think that's just like, again, back to this mindset of like valuing people. It might
Hmm.
feel analog, it might feel like a simplistic thing to say, but I think people that are not really, really understanding that and again, embodying that and running their companies that way,
Hmm.
they're going to be in for a rude awakening if they haven't already been this year.
Yeah. No, I completely agree.
Yeah.
Completely.
So sorry to
No, no, no.
hijack
That
you.
was that was perfect. That was
I just get a little on my soapbox,
that was awesome. What else I look at scorecards right now is I'm looking at hours of professional development per employee.
Mm, I
And
like it.
and the reason that we're looking at that is I think when you have a scorecard and not a scorecard that has 15, 20, sometimes people are just measuring too many things. But when you have a tight scorecard, it really sends a signal to what matters to everyone in the organization,
Yeah,
And if you're measuring it, then people know that you care about it.
you got it.
The same way that you would measure profitability or revenue. If people see, oh, we're actually tracking our ability to make sure that I'm learning new skills. I think that's important. So in many ways, this sends a signal. And there's not really benchmark or best practice, but I like to put it on there so you can start tracking to see, are we really developing our talent? Far too often people in agencies just say, I'm not learning anything or no one prepared me for this. If you don't
Right,
come in with the skills, you don't get upskilled at all.
right.
So I have that on there. Then also I put recurring business ratio, and that's really, you know, that's especially important this time around is because I want people to start looking at saying, what business are we going to have if we don't do anything else, just to set a floor,
Mhm,
so
mhm.
so that all right, this is what our revenue will be next year, and at that revenue we should hit this profitability. So this is my baseline. That means if nothing else, I can afford this staff. So really just focusing on that. Then I think profitability always has to be on there, and I go profitability by client. I think
Mm,
oftentimes we'll look across the agency and say, all right, this was a good year. We hit 20% profitability. But I think sometimes it gets masked that you may have a client that's bringing in 35% and another that's bringing in 5%. And really, why I'm trying to force people to look at it is just to make sure that there aren't some clients who are dragging you down. And I'm not telling anybody to do anything crazy like fire a client right now. We've lost way too many clients, but really just see where you're leaking money, to see how you can really bring that client up.
yeah, and also I think it's important to say you're not advising anyone to necessarily, let go of any clients right now,
Right.
but the little asterisk is right now, right? Like
Yes.
we have to manage cash flow and make sure that, we're investing in our people. We need money to do that.
Hmm.
But if the trend continues where one particular client or two particular clients are much lower on the profitability end,
Right.
the accounts aren't great to work on, we're over servicing maybe the clients are not treating our employees well, whatever the case may be, right?
Right. Right.
I still think it's important to have in the back of your mind or written down somewhere what those clients, which clients those would be the
Hmm.
day that we're able to replace them.
Yeah.
So sometime next year, you're probably going to get a client that is more ideal than this, one that's kind of in the bottom of the barrel. And
Yeah.
you want to know which ones are, sort of right on that chopping block. I would then add on top of that, it's not so much about just letting them go, but not leaving money on the table. Maybe you have a strategic partner that you could refer them over to and
Hmm.
get a finder's fee or an ongoing commission for a year or whatever the case may be.
Right,
So
right.
I think that's what it is when you talk about strategy or being strategic.
Hmm.
It's not just about bringing in, it's also about realizing that you want to up level those clients,
You're
right? So
so right. So
yeah,
right. I
yeah,
mean, yeah, completely agree. And I think once you put that asterisk next to some of those clients, it then allows you to say, okay, these guys are on the chopping block. Is there any other reason that we would keep them around? Right. And maybe that reason is, boy, they sure do look good on our client list. Or
hmm
when we get back to a world when we're networking, we always drop their name and
hmm
people get excited. Right.
hmm
But
hmm
to your point, it really is, let's just be strategic. But first and foremost, you don't want to pay for the privilege of having anyone as a client, right?
right,
You don't want to lose any money there.
right.
And then, I'd say to round out my top five, that last one is inclusion. And I think just looking at this current landscape, there's a lot of diversity metrics, and some are easier than others. But really, with inclusion, it's really just about how do you make sure that your employees are bringing their whole self to work. I think that's the one that's really tough. And you know, unfortunately, far too many people aren't bringing their whole self to work, and it's really tough to measure.
Yeah.
Really tough. I actually found a survey tool that's pretty good, and I can put a link up for your listeners so they can get that.
Yeah,
But
I'll put that into the show notes later.
perfect,
Sure.
perfect. And but what it does is really just show you, you know, across your organization, are people feeling included in the organization? And it has some questions like, I can express my opinion here without repercussion.
Mhm.
And for many people, that's huge, right? And many
Mhm.
people across many groups don't feel that way. Um, and another question it has is, I believe management respects everyone equally. So it's really just about, hey, do I feel included in this? And do people value what I bring to the table?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so that's really what I have in the scorecard right now that I think people should be focusing on going into 2021.
I love this scorecard because this is not, I mean, let's be honest. 3, 4, 5 years ago, some of those things would not be on that scorecard.
No, I'd have got laughed out the room.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I think this is a positive thing. This is incredibly positive. This is like if we all want to create the lives, the teams, the businesses, and like the world that
Mhm.
we ultimately, I'm assuming we all want to see.
Yep.
Um, I think the scorecard is brilliant. I think it's great.
Thank you.
I do want to talk a little bit more about the idea of inclusion though, because
Right.
again, we're here, we're having, potentially a little bit of an uncomfortable conversation, which I
Mhm.
love to dive into.
Yeah.
And the reality is that up until 2020, um, diversity and equity consciousness and inclusion, all of those things were what I would consider an HR afterthought.
Right.
So for the agency owners or leaders who have brought this into their awareness because they didn't have another option, and they want to shift from diversity being an HR afterthought to prioritizing diversity as a core value,
Hmm.
what would you say they should keep in mind as they start to shift that in their organizations?
Right. I would say when I saw this kind of playing out a couple months ago,
Mm,
in many ways, and what I'm speaking about is just what was happening racially across racial lines,
yeah.
and inclusion is includes racism and a lot of other things, but across racial lines, I saw a lot of people saying, "Man, I see our leaders saying things and kind of saying that they're allies, but I don't see anything changing at home, right?
Right.
I don't see
Right.
anything changing in our organization." So, one advice I say is really kind of sit down with folks and say, what's broken internally that we can fix, right? Let's just start at home before we make these platitudes about how we're going to play a part in the agency landscape of solving this. Is what's broken internally.
Yeah.
And I think what that does is everybody brings their perspective. And
Mm-hmm.
so some people may intuitively just say, hey, we got to get better at just project management. That may be one tactical approach. But then other people who are, if you're forcing people saying, hey, I want you to look at this and bring in thoughts of diversity, thinking about it from an inclusive perspective, you're going to have other people bring their own opinions and say, there's no groups for folks like me. Or you may have somebody say, I'm the only woman that works here, right? But you want to have those conversations and you want to include people. But I think the other thing you want to do is now say, how do we start solving this?
Right.
And everybody plays a part in how we solve this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that brings purpose into the organization, where instead of you just kind of at your computer being really tactical, you can now say, wow, this is what we're going to work on. And this is the part that I'm going to play in working on that.
Yeah.
And I think that's really huge. And I'm seeing that that's really helping folks, where you just say, you know what, I don't have all the answers, but I think collectively we do a good job of solving problems. We're super creative. Let's just sit down and think about what we can fix. What can we fix internally? And then it gives everybody a mission to focus on. You get buy-in.
Yeah. I love so much of what you just said. My favorite thing is that as the leader, I think we really need to drive home the idea that it's okay and actually really beneficial for you to be able to say, I don't have all the answers,
Mhm.
right? Like that's, to me, that is like the most courageous and most beneficial statement that you could make as a leader. I don't have all the answers. I
Right,
can't fix it. And nor is it a leader's job to solve all the problems or to fix it.
right, right.
And somehow we have gotten down this path where we believe that leadership is equated with being the one who solves everything, right?
Mhm.
Just as no matter who you voted for, like whoever was going to become our new president, nobody was going to, well, one person or no two people, no duo was going to fix the problems, right? It's
Right,
up to
right,
all of us.
right,
So I think like this shift in understanding that inclusion and diversity is not about just filling a couple of different seats at the table so
Mhm.
that, you know, your conference room or your Zoom meetings now look like a rainbow. That's not
Right,
the point,
right.
right?
Yeah, not at all.
The point is, and I think really that's what the HR afterthought was all about, in my opinion. It was like, how does this look good when we go to our about page on our website? Are there lots of like Black, brown, Asian, like, is
Yeah,
that what it looks like?
right.
And maybe that's the way that we can sort of show or prove that we care about this.
Exactly.
If that's what the thought was, there's no shame in that, but we can't continue under the same guise.
Yeah, yeah. It's so true. I
Yeah, the
mean,
whole idea of like the voices at the table. I think what I really loved also about what you said is like having those conversations to say what's wrong.
right.
Um, Dialing up curiosity is like my favorite way of talking about it.
Yeah,
Like let's all get curious. What's not working for you? What is
yeah,
working for you? You know?
yeah. And I think the key to that too is that we can fix, right? Let's
Mm,
not make the problem so
it's
huge that
overwhelming.
yeah, that we can't fix it. But what can we as a group fix? And I think it piques people's curiosity, but then also it's, well, what can we do? And you know, it could be as simple as something with a local organization, but who knows? And I think it's unique to every agency, but people come with some great ideas and collectively you're all working to change something. And
Yeah.
that's huge.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, this is what I would call like a, you know, a triple impact, right? Like if you really value the perspectives of every single person on your teams, whether
Mhm.
they're internal, you bring in some contractors, consultants, whatever the situation may be, if you really value all of that, then what's going to end up happening is your work is going to be more effective, right? Because
Right.
you've got every perspective at the table. You're not going to let anything slip through the cracks. You're not going to have a situation where you have like the Pepsi commercial that everybody was up in arms about, right? Or the T-shirt in that one catalog, right?
Right, right. Yeah. Oof.
Um, so the whole point is like the work is more effective, right? And so what happens when you have more effective work? Your
Mhm.
clients stay longer.
Hmm.
You don't have as much client attrition.
Right.
Those clients now become your brand advocates, and they refer people that are equal to them,
Exactly.
right? So they're
Exactly.
referring more ideal clients.
Right.
People are more invested in staying there because the work is good, they're feeling fulfilled, they feel like they're part of something. You're going to
Hmm.
have less employee attrition.
Exactly.
It's
Yeah.
just like this whole idea of like money follows value, right?
Hmm.
Like if we invest in our people for the right reasons, it's only going to bring us back to the profitability,
Yeah.
right? But it's hard sometimes to make that connection. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about. In this
Yeah.
case, it's like how do we get more strategic? But at the end of the day, we're saying if we value our people more, the trickle effect is going to make us more profitable.
Just, yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think being strategic is really just valuing your greatest assets, which is your people.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that they can bring more to the table, and that they want to bring more to the table, that they're motivated to bring more to the table? As agency owners, you're motivated by the fact that your agency is growing, that you're creating really cool work. But someone you hire, they want to make sure that they have a story to tell.
Hmm.
And so you want to make sure that their story aligns with your story. And I think the only way to do that is get everybody in the room. And now is the right time, to really get everybody in the room and say, all right, what do we have to fix? And like I said, in many ways, a lot of things will come out. You'll get the diversity and inclusion stuff because you want to force people to say, hey, I want all of this. I want the uncomfortable stuff to come up too. But then you'll get just the business stuff, like, okay, yeah, we need to get better with our billables, accounts payable, all that stuff. But it happens when everybody has a seat at the table and everybody is comfortable speaking up and knowing that they'll be heard.
Yeah. Yeah. This, to me, this is like the most important conversation of the year almost, because it's like, what, what have we been able to boil down from everything that we have learned introspectively with our agencies, with our teams? What
Hmm.
have we learned this year? Like, if we don't learn something from this entire
Oh,
experience between, the racial revolution, the pandemic, the election, the divisiveness, like if we don't come out of this learning more about how to connect deeper and how to grow sustainably, then it's
yes,
all for nothing, right?
exactly.
So strategy to me is like, how do we implement what we've learned and actually just make it more actionable?
Hmm.
And it doesn't just stop. Like, yes, we're talking about this in the context of like getting more strategic for 2021,
Yeah,
but that's just like a soundbite for a title, right? We're
yeah,
talking about
exactly.
getting more strategic for the rest of our lives. We're talking
Hmm.
about committing to being better,
Hmm.
to valuing people more, to
Right.
valuing relationships, whether those are our clients, our spouses, our team members, right? Yeah, I get a little excited about
No,
this.
I love it. I love it. I love how you summarize it too. I mean, I think really thinking about being strategic for 2021, as we've seen that everything that has happened is now you know what to do, right? So what's preventing you from doing it, right? Like
Hmm.
you're having the conversations. Now let's do something about it. You've
Yeah,
done the hard work of still having an agency after all of this, because many people can't say the same. So if you've gone through that,
right.
now it's just like, all right, what do we have to do next? And I think this is a time where you kind of bring everyone around and say, what's our next challenge?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. So, as we start to wrap up, I guess I would just ask the question, and again, it might be, a little difficult to answer, but for those agencies that are really struggling, like, yes, they've made it through
Hmm.
2020, um, but they're really struggling.
Right.
They were reliant on, some of the funding
Hmm.
that has dried up. We don't know what's going to happen with that going forward yet.
Right.
Um, and they're struggling to maintain their client relationships. Maybe they're seeing some of those drop off,
Hmm.
even towards the end of the year now. Maybe they're having to lay off a couple of people right before the holidays, which is also kind of hard. For
Yeah.
the ones that are really kind of right on that edge, what would you say to them, in terms of looking ahead and going into 2021?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say really this is a time where you have to focus on what you're great at,
Mm,
and I don't mean it as, some big ego thing, but what I'm saying is what I see a lot of agencies done before 2020 was kind of bolt on these additional services, right? So
Yeah.
you're working with a client and they say, "Oh, we need some help with social media." And so then you staff up and hire some folks, and then that client's gone and you're trying to figure out how to allocate that person.
Right.
And so what I'm saying is, what are you really great at? And maybe it comes back to a positioning conversation, right? And
Yeah.
so really just double down on what you're great at and focus there. Here's a good example. Like, I have an agency, they're really good with events. I think they're one of the best in the country. And of course, I'm saying that because they're one of my clients, but
That's okay. We're all biased when we talk
yeah.
about our clients. It's okay.
So they do amazing live events, and 2020 has been tough. But I think what they've done really well is that they moved the conversation away from live events to experiences, and so really they're helping their clients really think through, how do we create these experiences digitally, and then how do we think about how do we move out of this pandemic.
Mm.
And so I've seen them, they've taken a hit because there's just no live events, but they're really starting to go deeper into what does it mean to create a brand experience. And
Mhm.
so really experimenting with stuff online. And so that was their core. So I would say to those agencies, really just figure out what that core is, and how can it play out based on the way the landscape is. Do you have to do more stuff digitally? But I think it's paring back some stuff that you're not really great at, and that's where we have to be honest with ourselves. Like,
Yes, I was just gonna say that.
yeah, we're not,
Yeah.
we do it, but we're not great at it. I
Yeah.
think you really have to pare that stuff away and just say, all right, we're going to double down here. When someone says, I want you to come speak here, they're asking me to come speak because I'm an expert. Or if you're writing a thought piece, like, what is that? And focus on that.
Mhm.
That'd be my advice.
Yeah, and that goes back to your scorecard, right?
Hmm.
Scorecard about like looking at the profitability of each client. I would look at that as maybe the profitability of each service.
Right.
That was actually one of the things that I looked at my former agency, and it caused us to get really honest with ourselves and say, you know
Hmm.
what? We don't want to do social media anymore.
Yeah.
It's a thing that for us, there are tons of agencies out there that specialize in social media marketing and management.
Hmm.
For us, it didn't make any sense because when we looked at the profitability of each service, month after month, it was break even. And if you're at break even, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
that's not why you're in business. So
Right.
so we created a strategic partnership with a social media agency. That's all they did. And then we transitioned each of our clients over to it. So I think that's great advice, because
Hmm.
getting back down to what you're great at, what your core is, right?
Right.
So we can talk about that in terms of core values, core services,
Mhm.
um, whatever it may be. Get back down to that, because that's really where you're going to connect. Um,
Absolutely.
that's where you have the history, the deep expertise, right?
Yeah.
And if you had any question mark in your positioning, now it becomes a lot easier,
Tons. Yeah.
right? Yeah. So not that
Absolutely.
we're trying to, be cliche and always have everything come back to positioning, but the reality is that, if you are struggling and you're trying to extend yourself into multiple places, you basically become all things to all people, which means that you're nothing to
Yeah.
no one, right?
Exactly. And when everybody's budget's tight, no one's going for the generalists.
Right.
You know,
Right.
you want the experts because you're not going to have a second chance. And
Right.
you got to get it right the first time.
Right. Right. Well, Jeff, this is an amazing conversation. I knew it would
Yes.
be. I'm really, really grateful to have you in my life and that we were able to have this discussion. And I think it'll be really valuable for a lot of agency owners. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Ditto. And thank you for having me on. It was great speaking with you and your audience.
This episode has been brought to you by Workamajig, the #1 creative agency management software. Show notes at thrive.workamajig.com. Find out how your creative agency can become more productive and more profitable. Schedule your demo at thrive.workamajig.com.